There we go.
Been watching something on TV, when I can pull up the photo on there, and then I want this whole picture that we have, flick it right on the screen.
All right, I was hoping to wait until we had a board.
Oh, yeah.
I really miss having a
The
board.
smart board. You should get a smart board.
Yeah, I know. I'm having a hard enough time just getting the dry erase. I want a smart board.
They're very cheap.
I know, trust me, I would love mine. Sit there every day.
Nah, it's only 38 grand.
That's what I said for the government.
Yeah.
Man, I got 15 of those stuff on my hand receipt.
Anyway, the lesson 5, I wanted to touch on that tonight real quick. As we're progressing through the class, the reason I handed that out at the initial onset of class was so that as we're going through the class, it's easier to do with this in mind. You may even want to keep a copy of it just next to you with your notes, because as we're going through the lessons, you will actually see a section come up, and you'll say, oh, that's the answer, that's what I needed right there, the timeline. That's what that was. For example, just to give this, basically it's an outline of Jesus' public life.
Yes.
Now, you will need to consult, okay, here's the list. Try and help out. And for those of you joining us by YouTube, where's your turn? No.
Goes on YouTube.
A Bible dictionary helps. Bible handbook. Those are usually like your commentary type thing. Study Bible is also good. You get the other little outlines as you're going through things. A straight up commentary. Okay.
You know, one thing I'm wondering about, that Bible that is, it's called the Story, where it's written in narrative form, that may have it in order. Not gonna have a map of it, but it'll have a list.
I like this one.
Now,
I was thinking about getting this.
I do
A few years ago. Oh, did you?
I have my chart, okay, from Halley's Bible.
This is Living Bible.
Okay.
There's a chart. Okay.
Right.
Another one you can use, I wrote down here, is the, I'll spell this for you, Scroggies.
Okay.
Scroggies, The Unfolding Drama of Redemption. It's a book. I'll even get more explicit for you, pages 89 through 102. That'll kind of narrow it down for you. But there's an excellent Army of the Gospels right there between pages 89 and 102. And it gives you all these items right there. Just saying. Now, another thing to keep in mind, for example, some of the answers that you can actually, like, right now, you basically, okay, for example, when did Jesus' ministry first begin? What was the initial onset or sign of his ministry?
Oh, baptism.
Bingo. Okay. So we had the baptism in the lower Jordan River. The temptation, first disciples, first miracle in Cana. Okay, all right there. That was like that whole beginning of his ministry right there. Because in that one little grouping, you have his baptism, okay, which is the outward sign of here it is, John is proclaiming, here is the light of the world. Okay? Here it is who I have been telling you about, okay? Is the announcement. You also have the temptation right there, okay? You also have the first disciples, first picked, literally like the first handful, okay? And you also have the first sign of Jesus' ministry, which is the water and wine can at the wedding, okay? So that's all right there. Now, typically we know Jesus' ministry spanned what? 3 years, 3.5 years right there? Okay. So, if we know he was approximately 30, right? Okay, so these are just some notes for you to take down, because I'm kind of handing the first piece of it to you, to kind of get you started. So if we know he's 30, and you say he was born when?
Like 4 BC. Well, you're talking about the.
What
That would
it-
be the
it's
technical.
in three-
Oh, the
is
technical
it
1
for-
BC then, or 1 AD.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
we know the Gregorian calendar is off by how many years?
7.
Like 4 to 7 or something like that.
Four, we're gonna go for now, just so you're all on the same
Oh,
page.
yeah, 4. It is.
Right. So technically, keeping the 4 years in mind, okay, and he's 30.
37.
So if he's born in 4 BC and he's 30 years old at the onset, beginning of his ministry, what year would that technically be that he starts?
34, right? Or 80?
80,
AD.
26.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, it's that, that's
Okay,
right.
yeah.
Because you're starting out with
In the year,
4,
yeah.
adding 30.
Right,
Yes.
okay.
So 80-26 would be that first timeline mile marker right there, to kind of get you situated and started on that. Okay, and that was technically, excuse me, early winter of 80-26. Okay, so that kind of gives you that first grouping right there as a timeline of his public life right there. And then as we go through these lessons, keep in mind this, keep in mind the chart. And if I mention a year with, a significant event, something to that effect, write it down, because you're gonna know, oh, I need that for the sign 5. But you're gonna be normally doing this anyway for the note purposes, I would
Right.
hope anyway, so get you started, you got your first little block there, get kicked off. I'm only looking, just so you know, through basically 80-30 Passover. Okay, that's going to be the crucifixion and the resurrection. Okay, so that's like that would be the end / beginning, really, but the end of his earthly ministry. Okay. So we're just looking to fill in the time. And there's not a whole lot in between. I mean, you got 80-26 to 80-30, and I'm only looking really for significant events like 2 per year type thing. Something that you can viably track.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out. I
This
was
is
thinking
for
of like the
assignment
like
5,
chart.
Yeah.
Almost every. Okay.
Because technically what happens is during the course of public ministry, they actually do allude to some type of a season
Mm-hmm.
on a significant events. There's
I think they alluded to. I know they alluded to Passover at some, like when you would go to the temple for Passover,
like
things
the
like
temple
that.
cleansing and
Right.
things like that. So, I mean, really, if you only come up with, let's see, including the first one and the ending one, maybe 8 in between. So I'm looking for like 10 total events over a span of 4 years. And again, you could use a timeline tracking of, like a Bible commentary. So if you find something in a Bible commentary that can help set those events in order, use that,
Mm-hmm.
okay, for reference and stuff, things like that. So it should be too bad.
Now, are we including like
Bingo.
certain miracles and stuff like that, or?
You can,
Okay.
yeah, if you can use that to help track like a time event,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah. But like I said, I'm only looking for, including the first one and the end one, 10 events.
Okay.
10 timeline tracks right there. So nothing spectacularly hard, or, don't be like going crazy trying to like do this mile-long flow chart, yeah, because
You started with me.
I'm not trying to make this hard.
I just feel the need to make the whole point.
Yeah, so. Anyway, now that you guys have a, probably hopefully a better understanding of that. That should definitely help. Okay.
I know I bought it, but now I'm beginning to see why. Now it makes sense.
All right, you're noticing through your book here, you should have some blank spaces on it, I believe.
Yes.
Understand what's correct. All right, so we're gonna go through some commentary and some of the written here, so you can fill in the blanks. To make sure it's both pretty good. I got some side notes. I am going to also try towards the end of the course here to
Excuse me.
pull a lot of my older notes from the Passover and crucifixion. I get some pretty incredible stuff that just, whatever the book doesn't cover, there's more material I can add on towards the end of the course to kind of give you a very elaborate understanding of what occurred during the Passover, the timeline, why Jesus actually did not die on a Friday, and the fact that there was actually 2 Sabbaths that week. So it'll kind of blow your mind a little bit. Yeah. And it was only specific to that Passover time period that could have happened. So again, you see unfolding events on a specific timeline.
So that whole Solomon and Gundy story is wrong.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. The whole day and a half thing, and
Yeah.
Friday. No. He died on Wednesday. Because it says 3 days. Okay. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, rose Sunday morning. He's got to be in the grave, so he had to have died Wednesday. Okay?
Yeah.
And he wasn't left on the cross overnight, and he was dead by 3 p.m. So, had to be down before darkness, got to pull the body down. Right? Yeah, okay, so 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Jewish customs and everything else had to be adhered to. So,
Oh, yeah.
We'll get into that, but yeah, it's very interesting. Because it all lines with the Jewish calendar, not the Gregorian calendar.
And that's everything we learned as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, we're just all brainwashed, that's all. It's not our fault. We were just taught that way, but it was wrong. All right, so start off here. The baptism by John in the Jordan River marked the beginning of the public ministry of Jesus. He had committed himself. He could not look back. He began a journey that would take him to the cross. Okay. After all, he was born with Calvary in his eyes. He never really took his eyes off that goal. He lived with a sense of destiny. He knew where his lifestyle, his teaching, and his profession of divinity would lead. Ignominious death was a fate he accepted. It was why he came into the world.
Are you filling the notes, right?
Oh, he's just doing commentary.
No, we're filling in blanks.
Yeah, you should have some blank lines.
Oh,
Yeah, so the first one's going to be cross.
Okay. Sorry, I thought we were doing
Yeah, me too.
Sorry. And destiny. And then death. So cross, destiny, death. All right, now that he had officially launched himself into the public eye, people began to take note of him from that moment. In fact, the next day after Jesus was baptized, he was attracting disciples. Very next day. The second day, he went into Galilee, and others attached themselves to him. Now, on the third day of his public ministry, he visited a marriage in Cana, an occasion where his mother was also present. His first public miracle was turning water into wine at the wedding feast. It was obvious from the outset that Jesus' life was to be fast-paced and rigorous. To chronicle the events of his life, would need a biographer, several biographers. Since Jesus preferred to impart his instruction orally, he would need men to provide written accounts of his life and teaching. Called to this task were Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You guys probably learned some little facts here that you may or may not know, I'm not sure. If you don't, they will surprise you. You'll be like, what? I never heard that. The first three canonical records, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are called synoptic. Synoptic. S-Y-N-O-P-T-I-C. From the Greek word synopsis, viewing together. Synoptic Gospels. Because they provide a synopsis of Jesus' life and ministry. They have much in common, and although showing differing emphasis, present the life and teaching of Jesus from the same point of view. Okay. Now the four biographers. In these records, Jesus the Messiah is presented in four aspects. This is extremely critical. The way that each of these four Gospels was written. Again, like I was saying before, each one was written to a different audience. Each one was significant in the way it was presented because it had to appeal to that audience and the aspects of it. Most of those aspects were defined by culture and their current modern day environment. Okay. Now the four aspects were king, servant, man, and son. The first two relate to his offices, and the next two relate to his person. In each pair, the aspects are sharply contrasted, sovereign and servant, human and divine. These are not artificial ideas imposed upon these Gospels, but are found prophetically in the Old Testament. Now, some commentary here. It is likely that from the beginning, many of the facts and stories, included in the Gospels were written down, some perhaps in a mere fragmentary way, others in a more complete form. When Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote their records, they chose that which suited their purpose from the fund of knowledge, oral and written, which was extant. Much of this information was in common circulation among Christians from the day of Pentecost forward. So a lot of what they were already writing was already in circulation amongst Christians. So this was not uncommon knowledge. It was common knowledge already. Being that it was already orally presented, common knowledge, and yes, these were the 12, and those 11 were the original, and Thomas fell to the side, and just going through numerous accounts of things. A lot of this was already presented. Now Matthew, the author, although this gospel does not name its author from early Christian or early church history, beginning with Papias, a disciple of John onward, it has been accepted as the work of Matthew. So although this gospel does not name its author from early church history, beginning with Papias, or Papias, P-A-P-I-A-S, a disciple of John, onward it has been accepted as work of Matthew. So we're assuming it was Matthew. We know very little about Matthew himself, who was also called Levi. He is mentioned in each list of the 12. The only other mention is his call to follow Jesus. So there's really not a whole lot really known about him too much. We're going to start digging into who Matthew was. Matthew's gospel, being the target audience, was aimed at the Jewish reader. It was aimed at the Jewish reader, emphasize the kingly role of Christ, attempting to prove that Jesus was the Messiah, which was foretold in the Scriptures. Okay? One characteristic word in this book is fulfilled. He made no less than 60 references to the Old Testament writings which were fulfilled in Christ. 60 references. Repeated phrases include, it is written, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken. I see a lot of that. Matthew's objective was to present the Messiah to men against the background of promise, prophecy, type, and symbol, so that men would recognize in him the fulfillment of the voice of the past and the actuality of the present. Voice. Now, yeah, and the next one, voice. Now, the word kingdom is included 55 times. Kingdom of heaven, 32 times. So kingdom is included 55 times. Kingdom of heaven, 32 times.
You said 55?
55, yeah. Kingdom of heaven. Or kingdom, I'm sorry, kingdom 55 times. Kingdom of heaven 32 times. And Son of David 7 times. Now, the mighty king of Matthew's gospel was pictured in Jeremiah 23 and 5, where it says, Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment in the earth. Okay, that was Jeremiah 23, 5. Now, in section C, there seems to be 9 divisions of the book. Okay, the book of Matthew. The first one, birth of the king. Second one is forerunner of the king. Then we see testing of the king. Proclamation of the king. And laws of the king, number 5. 6, we see ministry of the king. 7, we see rejection. Number 8, we see entry. And number 9, we see death. Okay, second author, Mark. Mark probably never knew Jesus personally. That's kind of a, like, what? It's one of those what moments? Mark probably never knew Jesus personally. Okay. He was a companion and disciple of Simon Peter. Okay. Simon Peter. And later of Paul and Barnabas.
Later?
Yeah. So your line's going to be Simon Peter,
Right.
and then after that, later of Paul and Barnabas. Now, it is probable that his gospel reflects the story of Christ as seen through the eyes of Peter. It's also believed at this time, I'm not sure, we'll have to look at when exactly, but Peter for a while there from what I do know, Peter couldn't even write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Couldn't write. So it's in all common, probable, practical reasons that Mark knew how to write, maybe,
Mm.
prior to Peter or something to that effect. Now, it is sometimes referred to as the Gospel of Peter. Peter's connection to Mark's family is seen in the fact that it was to Mark's mother's home to which Peter went when the angel delivered him from prison. Okay, so they were pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
The target audience, Mark's Gospel targeted the Roman readers and emphasized the lowly servant aspect of Christ's ministry. This idea was taken from Zechariah 3:8, "Behold, I will bring forth my servant, the branch." Mark presents a record of a victorious campaign from Jesus' baptism to his ascension. He limited the content of lengthy discourses to emphasize Jesus as a worker rather than a teacher, and a man of action rather than one of contemplation. Mark tells of 17 bodily cures, 9 miracles over the forces of nature, 6 deliverances of demoniacs, and 3 raised from the dead. Besides the general references to he healed them, great multitudes, as many as touched him were made whole, and he healed them all, etc. He closes his gospel with the Lord working with them, confirming his word with signs following. Right up to the end of working scripture. Now, the Gospel of Mark is perhaps more chronologically ordered than the others. Okay. It is the shortest of the 4, yet rich in detail, dramatic in presentation, graphic and animated in style. Since he was writing to the Romans, there are few references to the Old Testament scriptures. The Romans would not have known Old Testament from New Testament. Right? They just were presented with the Gospel of Mark. That's really all they knew, their only understanding of who Jesus was, or is, I should say. Jewish words are explained, as well as Jewish customs. Latin words are frequently used, legion, centurion, etc. Obviously they would know what that is. It is impressive that the Messiah is presented first of all as sovereign and servant, and that the portrait of the servant comes first. Many believe Mark's record was the first written, for as the incarnate one, it is his service that leads to his sovereignty. Now see, the book of Mark is crowded with incidents, but yet we see 5 clear divisions. Okay. The first being the arrival and identity of the servant.
The servant?
2, the faithfulness of the servant. 3, the servant at work. I have got to get my board going. 4, the servant obedient to the death. Death being a key word there. And number 5, the risen and glorified one, still the servant. All right. Number 3, Luke. Emphasis and target audience, A. The special emphasis of Luke is the humanity of Jesus. The humanity. Representing Jesus as the Son of Man, as well as the Son of God. Luke features Jesus' character as intensely human, focusing on his kindness toward the weak, the suffering, and the outcast. While Matthew's record was aimed at Jews and Mark's at Romans, Luke seems to target the Greeks. Okay. Every word, however, in every gospel is intended ultimately for all mankind. God just wanted all the bases covered. Now, Jewish civilization had been built around their scriptures, therefore Matthew appeals to their own writings. Roman civilization gloried in the idea of government and power, therefore Mark calls particular attention to the miracles of Jesus as exhibiting his supernatural power. Romans were in a massive power trip, just makes sense.
Yeah, there was.
Greek civilization represented culture, philosophy, wisdom, reason, beauty, and education. Therefore, in order to appeal to the thoughtful, cultured, philosophic Greek mind, Luke depicts in a classical way the glorious beauty and perfection of Jesus, the ideal universal man. The work is even dedicated to Theophilus, a Grecian friend of Luke. Now, B, the author. Luke is mentioned only 3 times in the New Testament. He was Paul's fellow worker, accompanying him on portions of 2 of his missionary journeys, and was with him during his last days in Rome. It is believed that Luke wrote this gospel first before writing the book of Acts. They are like 2 volumes of one work. Luke's 2-year sojourn in Caesarea, in 58 to 60 AD afforded him opportunity to get firsthand from original companions of Jesus and the first founders of the church accurate information and detail of Jesus' life. Jesus' mother may have still been alive at that time, and Luke may have had the opportunity to even interview her. James, Jesus' brother and bishop of the Jerusalem church, could have supplied Luke with full details of the whole story of Jesus' life. Okay. Now see, the book of Luke is divisible into 5 parts. First one, the man made like unto his brother. Man made like unto his brother. 2, the man tempted like as we are. 3, the man touched with the feeling of our infirmities. Feeling. Number 4, the man as our kinsman, redeeming us. And number 5, the man still has man in resurrection and ascension glory. Okay, now the Gospel of John, its uniqueness. This Gospel is quite independent in style, content, and theological emphasis from the others. It is the most simple, yet the most profound of the 4. John makes repetitious use of such words as truth, love, light, witness, sin, judgment, and life. A simple vocabulary, but one with a great depth of meaning. This is the gospel that provides a pre-Pentecost look at what is involved in the Christian initiation. John wanted his readers to be assured of the identity of Jesus Christ. He began with the incarnation of the Logos. The Word was God and was made flesh. Revealed that Jesus and the Father were one, and let us know that Jesus is the only begotten of the Father. Now, John excelled in character descriptions, such as in the stories of Nicodemus, the woman of Samaria, the man born blind, and Pilate. By his spirit-enhanced memory, John painstakingly recorded the lengthy discourses of Jesus, not merely just piety sayings or ready responses. He went into great detail. It was awesome.
Identity. And character.
Item B, the author. The author admits to being the disciple whom Jesus loved. He was the son of Zebedee, and possibly even a cousin of Jesus. not only did he know Jesus from childhood, but became an eyewitness of what is written in his gospel.
That's interesting.
Yeah, when you really think about that.
No, I didn't realize he knew him from his childhood.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah. So, possibly a cousin, but knew him from childhood, which would also infer that John was from Nazareth as well. At some point, or moved there, or had already stayed there. Which, if you really think about it, might have been one of the reasons which drew Mary and Joseph to Nazareth, having relatives there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Usually relatives go to inhabit another place where relatives are. You get a leg up on a job, you got some roots to connect with, something like that. So it's very possible.
Makes sense why he left Mary directly in his charge.
Yeah, yeah. So you kind of, when you take into certain things in context, you go, well, it's not unlike what some of us might do. Well,
Right.
think of it in a humanistic way, and wow, that really puts a whole new perspective or sheds light on.
Of course, also too, because he knew that John was going to be the only one who didn't get martyred.
So it's not just, Joseph out in the middle of the road flipping a shekel and saying, camel tails or heads,
Right.
Do we go here or do we go there? Which way? It's a little more than that.
A little more thought to it.
Yeah. Call the camel, come on. One of the peculiarities of his record is the occurrence of the word Jew. It is found only once in Matthew, twice in Mark, twice in Luke, but over 60 times in John. So he made mention of Jew quite a bit. Only 8 miracles or signs are recorded in John, all showing the power of Jesus' word, the spoken word. That's pretty profound. No genealogy is submitted, as you find in the others. Some of the others, I should say. The Lord from heaven, as in John 3:31, 6:38, he did not need one. So he didn't need genealogy. It was just an already assumed fact that the Lord from heaven, he's God. C, the book of John may be divided into 5 sections. Okay, 1, Jesus, God manifest in the flesh, becoming the Son of God in redemption. Interesting is how much the beginning of John is similar to the beginning of Genesis. It is also interesting to observe that the Old Testament begins with God, and the New Testament begins with Christ. Both Testaments close with the promise of the Lord's coming. Number 2, Jesus revealed as the mighty God by his words and deeds. Now, opposition arose when he called God his Father. Many at the sight of the miracle of the loaves and fishes were convinced of the deity, that Jesus declared himself to be the complete revelation of the great I Am of the Old Testament. Jesus declared he and the Father were one, and Jesus revealed himself as deity to the healed man. Christ was at last acknowledged as divine by Jews and Gentiles. Now, number 3, Jesus manifests himself more fully to his own disciples throughout John. You see more of a description, more interaction in proclaiming who he is. He manifested himself more fully to this so that their convictions would be deepened, established, and become unshakable. You didn't want just for a loose example, where God declares to Adam, thou shalt not eat of this tree. And then Adam says, oh, by the way, God said, don't eat that tree. Instead, you have Jesus to all the disciples saying, I am the I am.
Yeah.
You're reading straight from, there's no he said, she said. It's directly from the source.
Oh, yes.
Number 4, Jesus, the Son of God, slain.
Lane?
Slain. Number 5, Jesus' claim to deity established by his resurrection.
Say that again.
Deity.
Deity.
What deity?
Mhm. All right, B, the harmony, differences, and order of the Gospels. Now, the synoptic Gospels generally agree in the order of events as well as the content. 3/4 of the Gospel of Matthew is a duplicate of Mark. And you do see that as you compare the two. Good book for you guys to pick up is a copy with it's titled The Seamless Gospels. It's actually the Bible, but it's written entirely in chronological order of the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Seamless Gospels, that's what it's called. It's actually pretty good. But by reading that, and then reading the Bible also, you get a really good chronological concept of how events really took place. Because sometimes you're like, oh, wait a minute, I thought, but it's just, some of it's out of chronological order.
Oh, yeah.
That's part of the reason why I got that story. But the story is funny because when you read it, it makes like, you can read the Christmas story in the Bible, very short, compact. You read it in there, it's like 10 pages. Because it includes everything, every account. And it's just like, man, read this before you open gifts, kids will be mad.
Okay, so 3/4 of the Gospel of Matthew is a duplicate of Mark. 4/5 of Mark is in Matthew in the same or slightly different form. Okay. 3/4 of Mark is also found in Luke. Matters peculiar to Mark alone constitute altogether less than 1 chapter. Now, of 88 incidents, the Synoptic Gospels have 71 in common. So not only do all 3 Synoptic Gospels have a great deal of material in common, they also show an undeniable agreement in other points. Now, the last week of Jesus' life occupies 1/3 of Matthew, about 1/3 of Mark, 1/4 of Luke, and 1/2 of John. John devotes 7 chapters, about 1/3 of his book, just to the crucifixion day, sunset to sunset alone. All right, so number 2, their differences. The differences in style and content have evoked reams of commentary on the 4 Gospels. More than we'll probably ever read. Honestly. Unbelievers and liberal theologians have magnified the differences, which are slight, in the attempt to discredit the word in general. Their efforts have been futile, however, and today more people believe the record of the evangelists than ever before. Rather than supporting the idea of contradictions, differences in detail in describing the same incidents actually preclude the possibility of prearranged collusion among them. So by trying to tear them apart, they've only done more to add support to them.
Right, that's exactly what investigators look for.
Yeah,
If there's too much, if the stories are exact, then it's wrong.
right.
Then somebody, then they're all lying.
Now, an example of what some call contradictions is in the story of the Gadarene. Matthew says that there are 2 demoniacs. Mark and Luke mention only one. Okay. Another one, Mark and Luke mention only one, probably because one was more violent and animated than the other. Likely the spokesman. I mean, that's who you're going to focus on as one speaking, typically. But if the Bible says there were 2, then there were 2. If another witness focuses on one of the 2, there exists no contradiction or grave disagreement. They just focused on the one
Right.
who was speaking. Other so-called discrepancies disappear when viewed in the appropriate context and background and when the proper hermeneutic is applied. Only Matthew and Luke tell the birth and childhood of Jesus. Matthew and Mark told on the Galilean ministry, while Luke centers on the Perean and John the Judean. Okay. John omits the most of the Galilean ministry and records visits to Jerusalem, which the others omit. The others omit the Judean ministry except the last week, which all 4 give rather fully. Material omitted in one gospel and included in another does not indicate disagreement, but individuality and emphasis. Critics claim that such a difference exists between Synoptics and John that they must have been describing a different Jesus. How many Jesus are walking around at one time, you know?
What's
I know it was a common name, but
Still,
like, what other one had at that time? It's like, really? Okay, so you got another one roaming the countryside, performing miracles with multiple disciples.
That was probably the Buddha Jesus.
Yeah,
As someone said, magic.
both or more being pursued by the Pharisees.
Exactly.
Pharisees must have been really busy.
See, I heard that even Barabbas, that his name is probably actually Jesus, because just something in the account. But they just called him Bar, which is son of whatever.
Yeah.
But his name was probably, because they were like, anyway. Give you a point of how popular that name was.
So what each gospel writer has preserved was not a photographic reproduction of the words and works of Jesus, but an interpretive portrait delineated in accord with the special needs of the early church. Now, number 3, their order. Current scholarship places Mark first, circa 55, 50, 80 AD. Then Luke, 58 to 60 AD. Followed by Matthew, and then John. Now, the dates are approximate, as indicated, and there is some disagreement in the Christian community as to the time of their actual writing. But to be able to narrow it down even to that specific within a few years on each one is pretty good.
Yeah.
As far as I'm concerned, that's good enough for me.
Yeah.
I mean, now, it was at one time, it was commonly held, believed that Matthew was written first and that Mark, or that Matthew wrote first and that Mark abbreviated him. Okay. A few still even hold that view. Most modern Bible scholars, however, are impressed with the greater freshness of Mark, and by the fact that Mark's order seems always to be followed by either Matthew or Luke. They also point out that although Mark is the shortest of all the Gospels, it is usually longer than Matthew in the narratives they have in common, which does not look like abbreviation. Okay. There's also, very little indeed in Mark that is not contained in Matthew or Luke. So why should Mark have been written? For these reasons, it is now commonly held, although it has not been proved beyond doubt, that Mark was written first and that both Matthew and Luke made use of the second Gospel.
Right.
Wow. There's also a certain amount of material common to Matthew and Luke, about 235 verses,
Wow.
but absent from Mark. Wow. Most of these verses contain the sayings of Jesus with some narratives, such as the healing of the centurion's servant. This is usually followed other source which has not survived, denoted by the symbol Q, standing for the German word quell, meaning source.
Hmm.
Okay. Some hold that the material circulated only in oral form, but most believe that it was reduced to writing, perhaps in Aramaic and then in Greek, before it had been utilized by Matthew and Luke. Still others hold that there were other documents from which Matthew withdrew, providing material which is peculiar to their gospel. Now, over the years, scholarly investigation of the gospel has concentrated on several stages of the transmission of the words and deeds of Jesus. Most of Jesus' teaching was done in Aramaic, although occasionally he probably used Greek. Sure, he did. I mean, when speaking to the Romans and things of that nature, I mean, not only that, but you have to also look at this point too. Okay, here's another thought. This is just quick off the top of my head, everything else. Jesus, by trade, was a carpenter.
Yes.
Okay. He had to interact with people
Right.
as part of that trade. He was, as probably most in that day, okay, they didn't have a sales staff. Okay. So as the tradesman, he had to interact on the sales aspect of the trade as well. What would you like? How many? This is what I charge. Yeah. Okay, so he had to market his goods as well. But
Right.
to market the goods, he had to speak the language.
Mhm.
Okay, the common language at that time in trade was Greek. Okay, so I'm sure he spoke quite a bit of it, was very well versed in it, and had quite an audience for it. So just another thought.
Well, it was very common then for people to know like 3 or 4 different languages too.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that was promoted by the Greeks.
Right.
Mhm.
You know, as far as to be able to span cultures
Right,
and to
yeah.
incorporate multiple cultures under a single culture, you know, and to provide learning and bridging gaps of just trade and everything. Yeah, it was amazing. It's amazing what Alexander accomplished in a short span there.
Unfortunately, 2 languages.
Yeah, really. Okay, so after his Aramaic sayings had been translated into Greek, they continued to be circulated by word of mouth, along with accounts of his activities during his public ministry. Those who had been with Jesus, as well as their friends and disciples, brought to recollection what he had said and done, thus providing the church with guidance in doctrinal, liturgical, and practical matters. It was a generation or two later that the 4 evangelists put into writing their account of the gospel. And the 4 accounts differ because they incorporate differing formulations of Jesus' words and deeds. They also differ because each evangelist was impressed to emphasize certain aspects in consideration of their particular readers. So a lot of people, when they look at the Bible these days, automatically assume that one book should just be a carbon copy of the events of the next book,
Yeah.
in the same way. Well, why would they do that? They were written to different audiences. And people astound me sometimes. And I know this is just part of my natural side, but you kind of almost want to say, do you really hear the words come out of your mouth? Do you listen to yourself? Like, stop and think one moment, okay? Look at it from this aspect. And this is mostly from the outside world, okay? Because I love it when people say, well, the Bible disagrees with itself. Where? Well, even the Gospels were written differently. You're right. Do you know why? You know? Do you want? It's like, let's please have this conversation. I would love to. Because I'll explain to you why and how in so many ways. And it's not to try and be mean or belittle somebody, but it's like they look to go on a path to destroy or tear down.
Right.
And in doing so, again, they're only building up and giving a complete foundation as to what they're doing. So it's amazing.
It's amazing they apply such a level of scrutiny and exactness to the Bible that don't apply to everyday life. Like if they heard the same news story from two different stations, they would repeat it the exact same way, otherwise it's not real.
Yeah.
No, you would think that there's something going on if you heard them repeat it the exact same way.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's no different than if you're writing a book about an actual person, like say one of the presidents or something. Not everybody's gonna write the same thing, everybody's
Right.
gonna
Exactly.
put their own spin on it.
How many autobiographies have been written by, you know,
Exactly.
About Abraham Lincoln that are, yeah.
George Washington and,
And when someone's writing a paper, they tell
Ben
you
Franklin?
not to use one source for just one source of reference,
Exactly.
otherwise it's gonna be
It'd be lost
wrong.
in the
But yet I can read each of
Translation.
those autobiographies, and as I'm reading each of those autobiographies, some of the details are more intricate than others,
Mm-hmm.
but generally the timelines are all consistent.
Yeah.
Right.
Where that person was at that time.
At that time.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
They may have different reasons why he took the same action, different stories behind it, but the action was taken. And that's clearly defined.
Right. Exactly. So,
It still is not
when you really look at it that way,
Mhm.
it's very easy to understand. It's amazing.
The four accounts.
Yes, the four accounts agree in essentials, okay? Because they are not imaginative compositions, but go back to a historical person who made a profound impression upon his followers. It would be unwarranted to regard the Gospels as a journalist's verbatim, again, what you just said in the news stories.
Right.
On the other hand, we know that the scriptures were inspired and preserved in such a way as to merit complete trust in the veracity of the evangelist's records. Together they provide a balanced account of what Jesus said